Christmas morning, 3:15 a.m. A woman is found dead. The official cause, cerebral hemorrhage, no autopsy. A death certificate signed by a physician who, records later show, did not examine her body. Embalmed the same day. Buried within 24 hours. And the brother who matters most in Washington, Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson, does not attend the funeral. That sequence of details is neither tidy nor placid. It looks, at best, like a rushed end to a private tragedy. At worst, it looks like a scene arranged to keep questions from being asked. Which brings us to the question this investigation asks bluntly. Did Lyndon B. Johnson order his sister's death? Or was Josepha Hermine Johnson's death a sad, avoidable consequence of illness and long-term substance abuse? If you want more investigations like this, subscribe. This is not a simple whodunit. It's a tangle of documented irregularities, decades-late allegations, known violent episodes involving people around Lyndon Johnson, and gaps in the official record that make definitive answers impossible for now. What follows is the documented trail of facts, the allegations that have been made, the credibility problems that haunt those claims, and the pattern of suspicious deaths around the Johnson orbit that fuels the question. Throughout, I'll flag what is a documented fact and what is an allegation, and I'll make clear when a source is alone in making a claim. You decide. Who was Josepha Hermine Johnson? Josepha Hermine Johnson was a member of the Johnson family, born into East Texas modesty, and later becoming part of the social fabric of Austin. She was not a private, unremarkable life. Contemporaneous accounts describe her as volatile, attention-seeking at times, socially visible in Austin's nightlife, and reliant on alcohol. She cultivated relationships, some intimate, some transactional, with men who moved through the city's political and social circles. Documented fact. Josepha's death is recorded as occurring in the early hours of December 25, 26, 1961. Her death certificate lists cerebral hemorrhage as the cause of death. Death certificate. Funeral and cemetery records show that her body was embalmed on December 25th and that she was buried the following day. Funeral home and burial records. There is no official autopsy report on file, county coroner records. Why does that matter? Because when a person connected to powerful figures dies suddenly and there is no autopsy, it closes off avenues that could either confirm natural causes or reveal foul play. Immediate embalming and swift burial severely limit the possibility of later forensic re-examination. Those procedural details, no autopsy, embalming on the same day, burial within 24 hours, are documented irregularities. They are not, by themselves, proof of a crime. But they are precisely the sort of anomalies that invite scrutiny. Key pre-1961 events, a career of violence and the people who intersected with Josepha. To understand why some people point toward a sinister explanation for Josepha's death, you need to know about a string of violent episodes in which some of the same names recur. John Kinzer, 1951. Kinzer was shot and killed in Austin in 1951. Over the years, claims and allegations would link his death to the political environment in which Lyndon Johnson moved. Josepha's name is tied to this episode in later accounts because some claim she had an intimate relationship with Kinzer and may have had knowledge about who was involved. Malcolm M. Wallace. Wallace is a figure who appears repeatedly in this web of claims. He was implicated in violent incidents from the 1950s, and his name surfaces in later allegations as an operative who could be deployed, at times violently, on behalf of others. Records from Wallace's trial and contemporary reporting show his involvement in violent crimes in the period. The precise legal history and outcomes are matters of public record. Trial records. Henry Marshall, June 1961. Henry Marshall was a federal agricultural investigator whose death in mid-1961 has been the subject of controversy. He was found dead that June. Contemporaneous accounts and subsequent commentary have questioned the official circumstances and motive. Some researchers and later sources have linked Marshall's death to his work as an investigator and to people within the Johnson sphere. These are documented events. Kinzer dead in 1951. Marshall dead in 1961. Wallace implicated in violent episodes. The raw facts are not especially political by themselves. What turns them into a potential pattern is the later overlay of testimony, allegations, and the observation that several deaths connected to the same social and political orbit were resolved quickly by authorities, and that key witnesses or potential sources of incriminating testimony later died or recanted. December 1961, the night that becomes the question. Now we return to Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 1961. According to contemporaneous records, a family gathering had taken place. Josepha attended social events that evening and was reportedly seen leaving a party at the Johnson ranch. 4 or so hours later, she was dead. Documented fact. The death certificate filed for Josepha Hermine Johnson names cerebral hemorrhage as the cause of death. The signature on that certificate belongs to a physician who, according to statements and contemporary records, had not personally examined Josepha prior to signing. There was no autopsy performed. Her body was embalmed on December 25th and interred the following day. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson did not attend the funeral, according to newspaper accounts of the time, funeral notices, and local press. These procedural irregularities, particularly the absence of an autopsy, left questions unanswered. An autopsy could have recorded brain trauma, hemorrhage from a fall, toxic substances, or natural vascular rupture. Embalming and quick burial removed the chance for later tests. The death certificate's signature raised eyebrows because it is standard practice that the certifying physician has examined the patient. When that did not happen, records show an unusual deviation from standard medical procedure. Again, procedural anomaly, not proof of homicide. Enter Billy Saul Estes and the 1984 allegations. For more than 2 decades, the events of 1951 and 1961 remained part of the historical record, unpleasant, perhaps scandalous, but essentially settled in public memory. Then, in 1984, a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice reopened the conversation in a different way. Documented fact, Douglas Caddy, an attorney, sent letters to the Department of Justice in 1984 containing allegations by a man named Billy Saul Estes. Those letters asserted that Estes had knowledge of, and in some accounts a role in, multiple murders allegedly connected to Lyndon Johnson and certain associates. The letters are part of the DOJ correspondence record, Letters to DOJ 1984. Allegation. According to those communications, Estes claimed that Lyndon Johnson had ordered hits to protect his political career. One of the victims named in these allegations was Josepha Johnson, who, the letters claimed, had been poisoned or otherwise murdered after threatening to reveal damaging information. Who is Billy Saul Estes? Documents note that Estes had a criminal history of his own, including violent offenses. His credibility has been an ongoing subject of debate. He made grave allegations many years after the events he described. That alone does not prove falsehood. People have testified truthfully decades later in other cases, but it does mean his statements require careful scrutiny and external corroboration. Important legal caveat. Estes' claims in 1984 did not result in criminal charges against Lyndon Johnson, nor did the DOJ publicly announce a prosecution based solely on his letters. The DOJ's files show limited or inconclusive follow-up. No definitive action establishing the truth of Estes' allegations is on record. DOJ correspondence and follow-up. What exactly did Estes allege? The specifics vary somewhat by account. The letters identify a handful of figures, Lyndon B. Johnson named explicitly, Malcolm M. Wallace as an operative, Cliff Carter as a coordinator, and Billy Saul Estes as a participant or witness. The methods alleged included poisoning and staged accidents. Estes claimed knowledge of multiple deaths across the 1950s and early 1960s that he attributed to decisions made to protect political power and silence troublesome witnesses. Remember, these are allegations asserted in private letters that later entered a limited public record. They rest heavily on Estes' testimony and on Caddy's forwarding of these claims to the DOJ in 1984. No court has adjudicated them as proven facts. Procedural anomalies revisited. Why investigators took notice. When the Estes allegations reached the DOJ in 1984, some investigators and independent researchers took renewed interest in the earlier procedural oddities surrounding Josepha's death. The documented irregularities, no autopsy, immediate embalming, a death certificate signed without a personal examination, and a burial within 24 hours, are the sort of things investigators cite when they believe there has been a hasty or suspicious covering over of a death. Why would those steps matter in a potential sabotage or cover-up scenario? Consider what each prevented. No autopsy. Without a forensic examination, cause of death determinations rely on external observation and the certifying physician's opinion. If the cause is contested later, the lack of an autopsy prevents modern forensic confirmation. Embalming and quick burial. Chemical preservation and early interment hamper later attempts to exhume and test remains. Embalming can alter toxicology results and make later determinations more difficult. Death certificate signed without personal exam. Medical legal standards generally require that a physician certify the cause of death after examination. A signature without examination creates a procedural gap that invites questions about how the conclusion was reached. Those are not, again, proofs of murder. They are anomalies that create a forensic black hole. Pattern analysis, clustering of suspicious deaths. One of the reasons the question about Josepha's death has lingered is what some researchers call a pattern. Several people with connections, direct or tangential to the Johnson political operation, died under circumstances that some have judged suspicious. When multiple unusual deaths cluster around a political figure, the public instinct is to ask whether coincidence is a sufficient explanation. The documented cluster includes John Kinzer, 1951, shot and killed in Austin. Contemporary reporting and later commentary have marked Kinzer's death as violent and politically resonant. Contemporary newspapers, police records. Henry Marshall, June 1961. A federal investigator whose death later prompted questions because of his role and the politically sensitive information he might have had. Contemporaneous press and agency records. Josepha Hermine Johnson, December 1961. Sudden death with procedural anomalies as outlined above. Death certificate, funeral records. Additional deaths and sudden misfortunes. Researchers have pointed to other fatalities and suspicious circumstances involving people who had information or associations relevant to the Johnson family or to certain political dealings. Names and dates vary by source, and not all are corroborated to the same degree. Pattern analysis is an interpretive exercise. A list of deaths by itself does not indicate coordinated murder, but it does create a circumstantial picture that some find worrying. Multiple people with knowledge or connections either die violently, are declared dead by sudden natural causes without autopsy, or become otherwise unavailable to speak. Investigative methods claimed by accusers, Estes and others who have alleged foul play, suggest specific methods and motives. The common claims include motive, to protect political careers, to stop the spread of scandalous information, and to prevent financial or political revelations that would be damaging. Method, poisoning at social functions, staging accidents or suicides to look like something else, using loyal operatives to carry out the acts. Coordination, the employment of intermediaries, trusted aides or local operators, who could be directed to silence a problematic person and then disappear from public scrutiny. Again, these are the contours of the allegations as communicated to DOJ and as presented by later researchers. They are not corroborated by contemporaneous forensic data. They rest largely on testimonial claims made decades after the events and on circumstantial connections. Credibility problems, timing, and the challenge of late testimony. Any thorough investigation must weigh not just the content of allegations, but the credibility of their sources. In this case, there are several reasons to treat late claims with caution. Timing. Many of the most sensational allegations were made decades after the deaths in question. Memory degrades, recollections evolve, motives for claiming knowledge can vary. While late testimony can sometimes be the key to uncovering hidden crimes, it also requires corroboration. criminal history, and motive of the accuser. Billy Saul Estes had his own documented criminal record. His history includes offenses that affect his credibility as a witness, court records, and criminal history reports. That does not mean he lied, but it does make independent corroboration essential. Lack of forensic evidence. For Josepha specifically, there is no autopsy, and thus no forensic record that could confirm poisoning or other non-natural causes. Embalming eliminated the possibility of much later testing. That gap makes it impossible to confirm or refute many of the details Estes claimed with physical evidence. DOJ response. The Department of Justice received the letters in 1984, but the record shows limited or no prosecution arising from them. The lack of criminal charges may reflect insufficient corroboration, evidentiary decay due to time and embalming, or allocation decisions about whether the allegations were prosecutable after so many years. Alternate explanations: health, substance abuse, and plausible natural causes. Every allegation demanding attention must also face the most basic alternative: human frailty. The defense view, and a reasonable one given the limitations of available evidence, points to Josepha's long-term alcohol use and unstable health as plausible causes of sudden death. Alcoholism and health problems. Chronic alcohol abuse can cause hypertension, liver disease, bleeding disorders, and other conditions that increase the risk of cerebral hemorrhage. Those medical realities alone can account for a sudden fatal event. Probability and coincidence. For a family and a political circle as large and active as the Johnsons, tragedies and scandals will happen. The occurrence of multiple unusual deaths in any orbit can statistically happen without coordination, a grim but important possibility. Lack of corroborating witnesses. No contemporaneous witness, who later provided independent corroboration, emerged to substantiate the claim that Josepha threatened to go public with revelations that would have forced an immediate, violent response. Later witnesses making such claims did so decades later. Institutional limitations. In 1961, investigative methods and the willingness to challenge powerful families varied by locality and by political pressure. Some procedural shortcuts may reflect the norms and pressures of the time rather than a deliberate cover-up, putting motive and opportunity into perspective. Allegations against powerful figures often rest on the presumed motive, to preserve power, reputation, and fortune. In Josepha's case, motive is offered in the assertion that she knew dangerous things about political bribes, affairs, or even violent crimes that could have ended Lyndon Johnson's career. If Josepha possessed such knowledge, the motive to silence her would be clear. But motive alone is not evidence. Opportunity and means must also be considered. Did those who allegedly carried out the deeds have both the access and the capacity? Here, the allegations name figures purportedly capable of operational action. Individuals like Malcolm M. Wallace and aides who could arrange for contacts to be present at a private event. Documented fact: the names Wallace and Cliff Carter recur in allegations and in contemporaneous records as people who intersected with the Johnson circle. Whether they acted on orders or in independent criminality is not documented in a way that supports a legal conclusion. A careful assessment of motive, means, and opportunity yields a perplexing middle ground. Motive can be plausibly inferred by those who accept the allegations. Purported means and opportunity are suggested by the named associates. But independent evidence tying orders to acts is lacking in publicly available, contemporaneous records. The problem of evidence that doesn't exist. Why the lack of autopsy matters again. We return again to an uncomfortable forensic reality. Without an autopsy, many lines of inquiry are closed. Toxicology could have detected poisons if they were present in significant amounts before embalming. Brain tissue and vascular examination could have explained the hemorrhage mechanism. Ruptured aneurysm versus trauma, for instance. Yet none of these possibilities can be convincingly proven or eliminated today because of the documented absence of those tests. That state of affairs is precisely why late allegations become so consequential. When contemporaneous physical evidence is unavailable, testimony and circumstantial chains take on a disproportionate weight. That weight can be problematic when the testimonies themselves are late and contested. Comparative cases: how scholars and investigators treat similar patterns. Historians and investigative reporters who examine clusters of suspicious deaths often look for corroborative threads. Multiple independent witnesses who recall the same details. Documentary evidence such as memos, phone records or orders, and forensic data. In the Johnson orbit case, the strongest corroborative submissions are the 1984 letters and later interviews and recollections from individuals who claim knowledge. But those testimonies are often uncorroborated by contemporaneous documents. Scholars caution against overinterpretation when much of the claim structure rests on a single source with credibility issues. At the same time, they caution against dismissing patterns entirely when multiple anomalies align with motive and opportunity. The proper historical approach is to lay out what is documented, note what is alleged, and explain what would be required to move from allegation to demonstrated fact. What investigators would look for now, if evidence still existed, consider what could, hypothetically, prove or disprove the allegation decisively. Forensic re-examination of preserved tissue or remains. Could toxicology confirm poisoning? In Josepha's case, embalming likely renders that option infeasible or impossible. Independent contemporaneous testimony. Did someone at the party see suspicious behavior? Did a doctor commit to the signature on the death certificate in a way that could be verified? The passage of time has dissipated many such possibilities. Financial or documentary paper trails, memos, phone logs, or orders that link alleged perpetrators to a plan. No such clear documentary chain has been produced in the public record that ties Lyndon Johnson by documented instruction to a violent act. Corroborating confessions from co-conspirators. Estes's allegations are not the same as multiple independent confessions. Without corroboration, they remain allegations. The case for cautious skepticism. The strongest argument against concluding that Lyndon Johnson ordered his sister's death is simple. The evidence does not rise to the level required for a legal or historical verdict. Procedural oddities do not equal malice. Late testimony is not proof. The official cause of death stands in the absence of contrary forensic fact. The Department of Justice, after receiving the 1984 allegations, did not produce a public prosecution that established the truth of Estes's claims. Moreover, the standard we should apply in historical judgment is not one of sensational suspicion, but of documentation. Historians require corroborated evidence before endorsing a claim that would attribute murder to a historic figure. Because that corroboration is lacking here, the careful historian must label the claims as allegations and present opposing explanations. The case for continuing inquiry. That caution should not be mistaken for complacency. Procedural irregularities, no autopsy, embalming that limits later testing, a signature on a death certificate without examination, are, in themselves, valid grounds for continued scrutiny by researchers who can access archives, interview surviving witnesses, or discover documentation that has not been examined. The fact that contemporaneous evidence may no longer solve the question does not silence the ethical duty to pursue truth where possible. And the pattern of suspicious deaths, Kinzer, Marshall, Josepha, and other contested cases, deserves historical attention. Pattern recognition is an essential tool for historians and investigators. When patterns persist, they merit sustained probing, especially when the pattern concerns the possible abuse of power. A final assessment. Accumulation of circumstantial evidence, not conclusive proof. So where does all this leave us? The available record presents three strands. 1. Documented procedural anomalies around Josepha Hermine Johnson's death. No autopsy, embalming, quick burial, and a death certificate signed by a physician who reportedly had not examined the body. Those are facts documented in official records. 2. A pattern of violent or sudden deaths among people connected to the Johnson orbit in the 1950s and early 1960s. Names like John Kinzer and Henry Marshall belong to the documented list of deaths that later commentators have linked circumstantially. 3. Late, detailed allegations from Billy Saul Estes, communicated to the Department of Justice in letters carried by Douglas Caddy in 1984, that claim Lyndon B. Johnson ordered multiple killings, including that of Josepha. Estes's credibility is contested due to his criminal history and the delay in making these accusations. Combined, these three strands create a compelling narrative of suspicion to some observers: motive, opportunity, means, and procedural anomalies. But combined, they do not produce the level of corroborated, contemporaneous evidence required to state as a fact that Lyndon Baines Johnson ordered his sister's death. The missing autopsy and the passage of time mean there is little hope of generating forensic confirmation now. The primary testimonial source for the most accusatory claim is problematic in reliability. The DOJ did not bring charges based on the 1984 allegations. In short, the case against LBJ for ordering his sister's death remains a web of circumstantial connections and late testimony, not a proven criminal conspiracy. It is a powerful and morally disturbing set of questions. But the difference between a plausible case to investigate and a proven case in court or in history is enormous. So did Lyndon B. Johnson order his sister's murder? The answer based on the public record is, we do not know. There are troubling facts and allegations that should make historians and investigators pause and dig. There are also plausible alternative explanations: health issues, alcohol-related complications, and the unsettling but real fact of coincidence in the lives of the connected, that counsel caution. What you can and should take away: documented fact. Josepha Hermine Johnson died on December 25, 26, 1961. Her death certificate lists cerebral hemorrhage. No autopsy was performed. Embalming and quick burial followed. Death certificate and funeral records. Documented fact. John Kinzer, 1951, and Henry Marshall, June 1961, died violently. Malcolm M. Wallace is a figure implicated in violent events in that period. Contemporary press and trial records. Allegation. In 1984, Douglas Caddy forwarded letters to the DOJ containing claims by Billy Saul Estes that Lyndon B. Johnson ordered multiple killings, including that of Josepha. These remain allegations and did not lead to public prosecutions. Letters to DOJ, 1984. Analytical conclusion. The available evidence is circumstantial and testimonial rather than forensic. It raises serious questions but does not establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt or produce conclusive historical proof. An invitation. We have presented the documented irregularities, the pattern that generates suspicion, the late allegations, and the counter-arguments grounded in health and absence of forensic proof. Now it's your turn to weigh the evidence. Was this a tragedy, the predictable result of addiction and poor health? Or was it a calculated act to silence someone who knew too much? What do you think? Was it murder or tragedy? Drop your take below and share this if you want others to weigh in. If you found this deep dive useful, subscribe to follow more investigations into power, secrecy, and the gaps in our public record. We will continue to search archives, read DOJ files, and interview surviving witnesses where possible. For now, the record holds an uncomfortable mix of proof and mystery: a sister dead on Christmas, procedural oddities that hamstrung inquiry, allegations that would shudder any family, and a nation left once more to wonder what the powerful may have done in the dark. You decide.